Okay, so we're definitely live on X. Sorry. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just had muted. Okay, great. We've got this countdown going. We've got 3 minutes left on it. We might not even need to do that whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was listening to him speak, and it was immediately clear that it was like on the dovish side, because the Bloomberg folks were like, "Oh, this is dovish," and the price wasn't immediately going up. And then, of course, it did. And I thought to myself afterwards, if I was a trader, there was like a solid 3 minutes there where you could have loaded up on. But that's not me. Okay. I think we're live.
We are live,
Finally.
ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
Finally, back again.
What's up?
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Capital Gains, the show where we break down everything going on, not just in Bitcoin, but how it relates to the wider world of politics and policy, the United States and around the world as well. With me again, as usual, is Bitcoin Magazine political correspondent. They call him the orange pill in the White House, actually.
Boom.
I've been hearing this.
How about that?
This little moniker popping up more and more. Mr. Frank Corva, welcome.
How we doing? How's everything?
Great. We're very
Nice.
good. Apologies to anybody that might have noticed a couple of technical glitches this morning. We're a live band. What can I say?
Correct.
We are figuring it out as we go. But here we are.
We're like writing the songs and playing them in real time, and learning the
Exactly.
instruments at the
And
same
learning the
time.
instruments.
Yeah,
And learning
that's
the
it.
instruments very crucially. Um, well, Frank, it's been a huge week, and it's funny. It's like summertime, and I kind of keep expecting things to be quiet,
Yeah.
and then so much more keeps happening. It's been a massive week. Well, it's like several stories, 5 or 6 of them concerning the Fed.
Yep.
Um, not the least of which is, of course, Jerome Powell's speech this morning.
Yep.
So that probably is a good place for us to start.
Let's
So
dive
why
in.
don't we do that?
Yeah.
um, as I said, speech this morning from Jerome Powell. What can you say? I mean, like all, not just Jerome Powell speeches and Fed chair speeches, they're kind of long and laborious and understated and cautious. And of course, you
Yep.
pick the eyes out of them and find that the 2 or 3 or 4 um, pieces of information that actually indicate newsworthiness. And of course,
Key
I think that
points.
the big takeaway from this one from Jerome Powell, in fact, his last as Fed chair, is maybe a bit of a dovish pivot. So maybe before we dig into some of the meat and potatoes of that speech, did you happen to catch it and any immediate takeaways?
Yeah, I would actually say it's funny. I was listening to Arthur Hayes talk about this on Friday. I was listening to him talk about how maybe it's not Powell's last
Oh,
speech at, because so I think it's in May of 2026 he would be replaced if I'm not mistaken. But maybe he wants to just sort of keep pushing back on Trump's wanting him out of there. I think if he was a rational individual, he would just move on because it's I don't think it's good for anybody to have that much pressure on them for any extended period of time. But also, just generally speaking, good to have new blood in those sorts of positions. Um, not that I care all that much about the Fed to begin with, but it is what it is. It's a reality of the world, of the old world that we live in as we move
yeah,
into this new Bitcoin world. But I did watch the speech. One of the key phrases that I took from it, he talked about the ongoing inflation problem, which I thought was
yes,
interesting because I think he needed to address it in efforts to say, hey, it looks like we're going to, like in efforts to be dovish, it looks like we're going to cut, we're acknowledging the ongoing inflation problem, but he kept going back and forth between their dual mandate. I think he was trying to make this case that like that's not the only thing we're doing here at the Fed. So I felt like it was a lot of like CYA sort of you know covering himself and covering the Fed to say, yeah, we probably have to do this thing. And I didn't get the sense it was because he felt the pressure from Trump. I think maybe I think he could probably, some of the reason Trump wants rates to come down. I think he probably acknowledges that those are reasons that we have to take into consideration. So, like, obviously, the level of debt and how quickly the debt is increasing, that has something to do with the federal funds rate. So it's an issue that I think he's now acknowledging, but there did seem to be a lot of CYA rhetoric in terms of like, yes, we know this, and this, but it looks like we'll probably do this. If I had to sum it up, I would say it was something along those lines. It was a little bit uncomfortable to watch, and it was also sort of depressing in that I'm like, man, we make such a big deal around this guy doing
yeah.
it, and then he just uses this like super vague language, and everybody's like, "Yay, tradition! Thanks for talking here." Like, what did that even mean? Like, what's
Yeah,
that? I
no,
don't know.
like you know, this isn't a Fed Watcher news broadcast, right? We're
Yeah.
not, so like, yes, we're interested in what Jerome Powell and the Fed have to say about things, but I think more interesting for us, as you just touched on, is in a big picture sense, just how absurd it is that this is what we do. Like
Yeah.
the whole world tuning in uh, on a regular basis to hear what one man, the high grand wizard of setting the price of money
Money.
has to say
Yeah.
about what the various councils of people behind the scenes have determined as the outlook for what they say are the most important measures of the economy, and also the fact that we're supposed to take it on their word that they've done a good job of even measuring that. So it matters, obviously. The fallout
Yep.
immediately, on this alleged dovish pivot is risk assets, including Bitcoin,
Yep.
jumping up. But I think we're all, at least those of us in the Bitcoin world, are kind of in agreement that this is just an absurd situation that hopefully we live to see the end of.
Yeah. Ideally, yeah. So it's, I mean, to speak about what it did for Bitcoin in the short term, I think we saw Bitcoin rip from what 112 to what is it at 115 or 116 right now.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a very clear interpretation. Market saying that they are going to at least cut by 25 basis points. Again, I don't. It seemed like maybe I'm wrong. It seems like he has to do something. Um, but again, it's like Lynn Alden, sort of nothing stops this train one way or another, whether it's sort of the Fed cutting rates or more debt being issued. We're still going to be moving in a similar direction of living in a relatively highly inflationary environment, at least for the next few years.
Well, I think that was part of it, is that a signal that so the Fed has these 5-year policies.
Okay.
And they kind of set one in place in 2020. Like, this is how we're going to go about, broadly speaking, doing our job. And I think in this speech, if I'm not mistaken, there was an indication from Jerome Powell that the Fed is going to, well, I don't think he used the word abandon, but move on from that policy prescription and come up with a new one at some point in the future. Anyway, that's just the first Fed story that we have to touch on. And even though it's maybe the most impactful in a macro sense, might not be the most interesting, at least for you and I, because when you dig into the micro stuff, there are some, under the surface of all of this, some strange things happening regarding the Fed. Some good, some weird. Let's start with the good. A few days ago, the Fed also announced that it was ending its novel activities supervision program, through which it was essentially applying a heightened level of scrutiny to any and all banking activities relating to Bitcoin and crypto, which sounds anodyne enough. Well, it's just the Fed peering over our shoulders and watching what we do. But of course, it was a lot more than that. So this is good news. Any kind of headline takeaways from this from you, or what did you make of this?
I don't know. I didn't personally dive into this too deep, but I sort of look at it like it's again like a releasing of like the knee from the neck sort of thing. Like, we're not going to be super aggressive in trying to, as you said, look over your shoulder, police you, etc. Maybe that interpretation is too generous. But I think ideally, it felt like some sort of level of, I won't say deregulation, but something in that spirit related to certain, as it put it, crypto and fintech activities in banks. I would imagine banks are happy about this. I mean, banks have wanted to custody Bitcoin forever.
Yeah, I think banks will be. And we've got a couple of hints as to why that might be. But I think the Bitcoin and crypto industries at large will be, for sure. Now, Senator Lummis's interpretation of this was not that it was, a kind of benign policy shift, but rather that this was actually part of the end to Operation Chokepoint 2.0, and that perhaps the novel activity supervision program was somewhat instrumental in this. Fairly explicitly put here from Senator Lummis. So, I think when people think about Operation Chokepoint 2.0, the most important thing to understand is there's not one directive here. There's not one policy. There's certainly no law, right? What we have is a kind of penumbra of guidances and wink, wink, nudge, nudge understandings between various agencies that have collectively drawn this net around anything related to digital assets for the past few years. And so this is kind of one of the legs of this program, seemingly coming out.
Getting kicked out. We like to see it. Again, whenever I see anything that says less involvement, I sort of breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. I never feel like it's time to just breathe the ultimate sigh of relief, though. Like these sorts of things, I feel like it's sort of like a situation where you cut off one head and the other head sort of pops up somewhere else. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's sort of especially after what went on under the Biden administration. It's a little bit of like my trauma reaction to this, like my PTSD reaction to like, I hope that this is just the end of something and that we just sort of move on from it here. And it seems, I think Senator Lummis, she seems to be signal, and when she does say something, she tends to have some, obviously some inside knowledge of this, and she's sort of sending a message to the wider space about this. So I'd love to take her at her word here, and hopefully this is just the end of something and it's not going to regrow somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Of course, regimes change, elected officials rotate.
Yes.
Secretaries of government departments do too, and policies change. And as we've spoken about, the big question mark hanging over all of this is this a pendulum that can swing back in the other direction?
Yep.
I think and of course the answer is partially, maybe. It's hard to imagine an Operation Chokepoint 3.0 starting. Like, that's hard for me to imagine happening. Because I think partly in the same way that it's hard to stop these things, it's hard to start them up again. You're going to, don't even really need to theorize about this, but you can imagine how hard it would be to. Part of the reason why it succeeded in the first place was operating under the cover of darkness, which it now no longer has, right?
100%. I would say the other thing to maybe pay attention to also is like, by midterms and by the next presidential election cycle, there's always the possibility that more Democrats could come around to this, and which would make it harder for that pendulum to swing back as hard. I think there's always going to be some people who are, more kind of like Luddites, or just have there's entrenched interests, or the banking lobby supports, so the Brad Shermans of the world, if you will. And it's, there'll be some of that, but I think it's also like, how hard was there sort of like a pendulum swing back against the internet? You know what I mean? Once certain things get ingrained, I think it's really difficult for them not to be. And I think on top of that, the powers that be in the Treasury, let's just say if we look at stable coins, for example, once they're more ubiquitous, which I have mixed feelings about, I don't see even Democrats saying like, no, we don't want these people buying our short-term treasuries. Stop this stable coin stuff immediately. And I think where that works to our benefit is that because crypto, it's not Bitcoin, stable coins, crypto, like it's not really broken up like that in the minds of many people. It's more like, okay, that seems to be working over there in the crypto space. Let me just sort of leave that alone. That's the ideal scenario. Surely not my old editor, why am I totally spacing out? Mark, totally spacing out. I apologize. My old editor, Bitcoin Magazine, Mark, he wrote the Bitcoin dollar. Obviously has a lot to say about stable coins. And, yes, Mark Goodwin. One of my new managers is Mark Mason. So I was mixing up the M and the G there. So thank you. Appreciate that. I think ideally things get sort of so ingrained and even to some degree normalized. I don't think crypto is this taboo term maybe in the next 5, maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. I just think on some level it gets normalized. Obviously, some of the stuff with Trump and meme coins and all that kind of stuff might still have some effect on that. But I also think, to Trump's credit, that seems to be dying down. He hasn't issued another meme coin. The same arguments are getting rolled out by certain Democrats and this and that. But it's like, all right, dude, we get it. It happened. Not many people like it, but we're not really there anymore. And it seems like the conversation around this stuff is starting to get more sophisticated and more people are starting to sort of see the benefits. So ideally we keep trending in that direction. And as you said, we don't see an Operation Chokepoint 3.0. That'd be terrible.
Yeah, I think just to add on to some of those reasons why I think it's unlikely, I think once a bunch of people in a party lose an election cycle badly, and for some specific reasons relating to in the case of last year, the Democrats' historically hostile takes on crypto and Bitcoin. Once you lose a few races, it's hard to imagine you're going to run back to the well on the same issue in the same way. And in fact, that's kind of spoiling something that we'll talk about in a moment, which is maybe a bit of a pivot. And you mentioned this Democrat pivot on this. There may be an inkling that a prominent past anti-crypto Democrat has maybe changed their views. So we'll come to that shortly. Just to kind of put a bow around this from the Fed's point of view, this OCP 2.0 thing, or at least the novel activity supervision program.
Yep.
Speech also during the week from Fed Reserve Board member Michelle Bowman. In it, she spoke about a bunch of things, spoke positively about stablecoins and tokenization and other things too. But pointedly, she said this. In fact, why don't I just? This is a minute long. I'm gonna just play it.
Let's do it.
It's not the role of examiners or policymakers to direct which customers or industries to serve or which products to offer. That decision lies solely within the purview of bank management, limited only by the safety and soundness of the institution, the legal activities of its customer, and risks, if any, to financial stability. Over time, reputational risk emerged as a priority area that policymakers emphasized for examinations. Exams or reviews focused on reputational risk have often lacked a sufficient nexus to financial risk and safety and soundness considerations that are the appropriate focus for our supervisory activities. So let me be clear. We must adopt an approach that does not penalize or prohibit a bank from banking a customer that's engaged in legal activity. This approach must allow and encourage banks to provide banking products and services to any legal business without disfavoring any particular viewpoints, businesses, or industries.
So there you go. So it doesn't take much reading between the lines to get the gist of what she's saying there, which is that policymakers have been putting pressure on banks to apply some scrutiny to this reputational risk consideration, which, as Michelle Bowman just said, was not in any real way connected to financial risk. It's not.
Right.
This hasn't been banks saying, all right, well, this is it's a risky crypto business, so there may be some systemic risk involved with letting it join the financial system. No, it's just been, we don't like it for essentially political reasons. So that's been what has been happening, and now the Fed, in more ways than one, has kind of, I suppose, joined the movement of repealing that kind of policy prescription. Now,
kind of nuts. Yeah.
Kind of nuts. However, moving on, but still with the Fed, there is this other story from the week of current Fed Governor Lisa Cook now being referred for criminal investigation for mortgage fraud. And I think Donald Trump in the last 24 hours has come out and said that if she doesn't resign, he's going to try and fire her. So a little bit of context here. I think what the allegation is, by the way, is that she has claimed more than one primary residence. Right. So if you've got multiple houses, one of them is supposed to be your primary residence, and this affects whatever your your home loan situation is. It's this isn't like this is not Al Capone level of like organized crime here. This is like it's a fairly it's on the one hand a mild allegation. But on the other hand, something that's, I would say, fairly simple to prove one way or another. Now, this Lisa Cook is not the only public official that has kind of attracted the ire of the DOJ and the Trump administration for this very
issue.
Letitia James, I think the
attorney,
the judge,
New York attorney. New York Attorney General.
That's right. It wasn't the Atlanta case. It was New York Attorney General, who was kind of leading the case, the kind of civil case against Donald Trump. I think a lot of the alleged fraud related to his own personal valuation of his own property in Florida, and whatever that case was, you could say in retaliation for that, she then kind of attracted the ire of the Trump administration, and it has been found that she too has kind of been claiming multiple primary residences.
It's interesting, if you don't mind me, it's just interesting that I'm kind of wondering who in the administration decided that this was the thing to go. Like who was like, let's go after potential mortgage fraud or something like that. It just seems like such an odd thing. Yeah.
A couple of things. One, it reminds me of this. There's this like famous quote, and I can't remember where it's from, but it's like, "For my friends, everything, and for my enemies, the law."
Right.
And what that says is, and I think particularly now with the state of the state of political polarization in the United States in 2025.
Yep.
What this demonstrates to me is not that this is a kind of political prosecution, although that it may well be, but I think broader than that, it's like anything that you do is on this record as a public official, or I'll say that another way of saying it is it's like so hard not to have something somewhere buried in your past or in your paperwork or in your IRS filings or whatever it is that wouldn't technically be a violation of some law on some book, right?
Absolutely.
Who amongst us has not thought about how hey, maybe, what's the most tax advantageous way to kind of file things? Like, all that is to say, to your question around like who in the administration is tracking this down, I almost kind of think that it's like the thought process is, let's just dig around, look for a few of these obvious things that so many people probably could have run afoul of, and then and for our enemies, they'll get the law and they'll get it good and hard when it comes to these issues. Now, I guess to the issue at hand here with Lisa Cook, clearly this is an attack on, it's part of the attack on the current
Fed
leadership of the Fed.
The Fed, right? Yeah.
And it's tied to this question of their inertia and an unwillingness to act on lowering rates in a timely fashion. Yeah. We talked about this with Jerome Powell as well. It's one thing I say is I think it's kind of funny that they've set this Bill Pulte guy up to be like the attack dog on this issue.
Wild, man. He's wild.
Also because, just sidebar about this guy, like he made a name for himself. I remember it was 4 or 5 years ago. He made a name for himself. He like blew up on Twitter and got really famous for like being for giving money away. Like he would run these like Twitter philanthropy things.
That's what I thought it was, right? Yeah.
This was the guy, and he was like giving money away on Twitter, and he was like, this man of the people, philanthropist guy who's like this giant-hearted rich guy.
Yeah.
And it's funny to see him become this like Trump administration attack dog now.
It's funny you say that. We don't, for the people listening, Julian and I don't go over this, this conversation beforehand. But as you're saying that, I'm like, I remember that guy. Like I thought I was like, it can't be the same dude. I remember thinking to myself, as I've gone, he's like the sort of character where I go back and forth between following him. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't need this in my feed, because it's a lot of the attack stuff. But I'm like, wasn't this guy like trying to help? I don't know. It's an interesting. People are interesting. I mean, it's not that you can't help, but also do this other stuff. I don't know. It's an interesting juxtaposition, though.
Well, let's. I mean, just a quick thought. A quick thought on this idea of Fed independence. Because I was thinking about this, and on the one hand, clearly this is a violation of norms, right? Like the Fed is supposed to be independent, and it's supposed to be free from political manipulation and all these other things. Yep. It's clearly a violation of this norm, but not that I want to really endorse that wholeheartedly, but I think it's worth interrogating what independence actually means for the Fed here. Like, it sounds good, and if you just on its face value, you say, well, we should respect our institutions and norms and traditions, fine. But the independence of the Fed, like, what does that actually mean? Because to me, there's another interpretation of that, which is beyond the reach of democratic accountability.
100%. Right? 100%. Yeah.
Oh, it's so it's just a different valence on the same idea. Like, if you don't like the president, you obviously are not going to want the president bullying the Fed into doing things that the president you don't like wants to do. Fine. But this is an institution that is beyond the reach of voters, largely beyond the reach of Congress and the president too. So who exactly are they accountable to? obviously to some degree I'm preaching to the choir with Bitcoiners here, but
right.
there is a part of me that just says like, maybe independence for the Fed isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Well, I mean, the Fed, technically, what is the Fed? It was born out of a consortium of the big banks.
Yeah.
And so it still is that. It's like it pretends, it's kind of like it's a federal, quote unquote, a federal entity when it's in its best interest to portray itself as such. But otherwise, it's sort of like a public-private partnership type entity.
Here's the issue. Here's the issue for me. I think the independence of the Fed, I think, gets a little bit conflated with let's say the independence of the Supreme Court, right? Like, we're not talking about balance of powers here. This isn't like a branch of government and like, oh no, we have to protect the integrity of the Federal Reserve in the same way they have to protect the integrity of the Supreme Court. Like, no, this isn't something that the founders were talking about as like the balance of powers in a republic. This is a private, quasi-private institution. So, so a little mini rant there on independence and what it actually means.
I'm with you. Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to parse out this stuff at the Fed when I look at someone like Lisa Cook or Powell and the way they're being treated. I guess just on a personal level, I don't know. I don't like to see people, abused, bullied, whatever.
Yeah.
But on like a broader level, it's like, I'm not a big Fed fan. I'm sort of like maybe this is just karma for being involved with this institution. Maybe this is just what you get, because the Fed, when you really sort of, I remember I used to listen to a lot of Breedlove stuff. Like when you dive into the amount of human labor that's essentially been stolen from people based on how much the dollar has been debased because of the Fed, it's pretty staggering. But but most people don't see this as such a pernicious thing because it's a very difficult thing to mentally wrap your head around. The debasement of currency and the idea that one institution sets the price for what it costs to borrow money is something that we just sort of. It reminds me of the David Foster Wallace poem, like This Is Water, where it's like, where the poem is essentially about like, what do you mean? Like, what is water? But you're surrounded by it, so you don't even realize you're sort of like in this atmosphere. It just is the world that you're a part of.
If you're a goldfish, you don't even know what water is.
Exactly. You're just floating in it. And so we're sort of floating in this system. Obviously, the water that surrounds a goldfish is healthier for it than the system that we're existing in. But I think there's just a certain amount of like, it just gets taken for granted. Like, of course, governments issue money. Of course, there are central banks. There's nobody, I would say maybe unless you're 112 years old or 13 years old, the Fed was started in 1913. You don't know what life before the Fed was. And at that rate, we're not really going to 113-year-olds in our society to get a lot of information. Like we've sort of just let them relax at this point, if they even exist. So it's not like we have any real insights on this kind of stuff. At the same time, there's a lot that needs to be discussed here. If you're a newer Bitcoiner who's listening to that, worth definitely doing a deep dive on the Fed. You got The Creature from Jekyll Island, the book about how the Fed was born. But it will sort of make you, at the very least, second guess the system and all this kind of stuff. But I think, to your point, like, is Lisa Cook deserving of this? Jerome Powell, like maybe on some karmic level or some sort of whatever, but on a person-to-person level, it's a little bit hard to watch. It's
personally, no, right? Yeah. As individuals, it seems to be unfair, but then on a you can always run to that defense of these institutions, because the institutions are always at any one moment in time run by individuals who don't bear the weight of responsibility for the entire institutional history of this thing. So almost by definition, if you like, the only way to go after an institution is to go after the people inside it, and it's always going to seem like an overreaction. Jerome Powell is not responsible for 100 years of Fed wealth confiscation and redistribution. But if you don't go after him, who do you go after, right?
Who's responsible? Who's
responsible? So someone's got to be left holding the bag, as we say.
Perfect phrase to use for the Fed there.
Nice. Okay, moving on. Some more good news for the week. Again, on this theme of federal government moving in a positive direction with respect to how it enforces and regulates people in the crypto industry and Bitcoin, of course, as well. Acting Assistant Attorney General at DOJ, Mark Gagliotti, sure I kind of butchered that name.
I think it's I think it's Matthew, if I'm not mistaken.
Matthew.
You said Mark. Yeah. We were talking about Marks before.
Yeah. So he in a speech, I believe, just yesterday.
Yep.
He said that there's going to be kind of a change of approach from the DOJ, and that going forward, consistent with, I'll just read it out now, consistent with principles of notice and fairness, where evidence shows that software is truly decentralized and it automates peer-to-peer transactions, and when a third party does not have control over assets or custody of them, Section 1960B1C charges will not be filed and approved. So that particular section is talking about the relevance here, I guess, for us and for you too, with a lot of the work you've been doing, is this is what Roman Storm of Tornado Cash was found guilty of. So
and what the Samurai devs pled guilty to in their
and
plea
what the
deal,
Samurai exactly
money
what the Samurai
transmission,
devs,
unlicensed money transmission.
Exactly, unlicensed money transmission. So great to see this, but I guess questions you will have related.
So actually,
will be related to what happens now.
Yeah, if you could refresh the agenda, I actually wrote an article on this last night at 7 or 8 o'clock. I'm not as optimistic as Eleanor Terrett about this, and I'll give some background there. So I'm not pessimistic. I won't go that far, but I will say what I said in the piece here is curb your enthusiasm about this stuff, because I think the devil was sort of in the details of this talk. So if you get a chance, check out this article. So I think what Galeotti said was he talked about how he was going to do this. So he reiterated some of the sentiment and some of the points from the memo that the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Todd Blanche, published in April, the Blanche memo, as it's colloquially referred to. In that, he said, we will not be going after crypto companies or devs. We'll be going after the bad actors themselves. And Galeotti said as much. He said, we're going to essentially we're not going to treat devs as criminal by default. We're going to focus on due process more to let them know if they're actually doing something wrong before we go after them and prosecute them. But there's a number, and he hit some great high notes about all this stuff. But then he added some caveats, and that those came after words like however or though. Yes. They did talk about,
criminal intent. I noticed this issue kind of.
Correct. Yeah. So criminal intent is still going to be a thing that they focus on. And in my opinion, after this piece of rhetoric from Galeotti, I still think the DOJ would have gone after both Roman Storm and the Samurai devs based on the evidence that I saw presented, based on what the DOJ alluded to what it was going to present in the pretrial hearings I attempted for Samurai, and based on the evidence I saw presented in the Tornado Cash case. And a lot of that had to do with rhetoric. And I wrote in the piece, I said, if I'm being completely honest, even if devs are joking about people using their things to, to launder money and this and that, they should stop. So it's partially on the devs to stop even joking about this. It's not illegal to joke about it, but it's not going to help you in court. On the other side, as I just said, it's not illegal to joke about this stuff, and it doesn't inherently mean that because they were talking about people bad actors using their services or what they've created in any sort of way, it doesn't inherently make them guilty. It's just not going to make their case much.
But it was a big part of this. I don't know how big it was, but it seemed to be a very meaningful part of the Samurai case. The fact that they had tweeted. Obviously trolling and joking, but it was,
ideally,
you would think, but it was like when the Ukraine war kicked off, and they were like, "Hey, welcome Russian oligarchs to our platform," that type of thing. So I guess what you're saying is that the presumption here is that would kind of qualify as criminal intent.
That's it. So you're leaving the door open to. There's a lot of interpretation here, and I think it was very intentional with Galeotti yesterday. And I wasn't even going to watch the talk, to be honest. I saw Peter von Valkenburg from Coin Center tweet about this, and I was like, okay, now I got to watch this stupid thing. Like it's after 5 p.m. I just want to be off for the night. Now I got to watch this stupid thing and write a piece about it. But yeah, I will say that I have some cautious optimism. I think I'm always a fan of this stuff getting talked about in public spheres. And I want to give a shout out to Amanda Tuminelli, who not only introduced Matthew Galeotti, but did a one-on-one talk with him afterwards. And I think it's always there's always some level of it being good that there's accountability of these public officials showing up to events like this to talk about what's going on, because it's something that we can at least point back to and say, hey, you said you weren't going to do this. And apparently, according to Amanda Tuminelli, who is the executive director, I believe, of the DeFi Education Fund, who has written amicus briefs for the Tornado Cash and Samurai cases, this apparently will be what Galeotti said will be something that I believe the Tornado Cash lawyers, the defense lawyers, can now use at the appellate level. Or I believe I have to go back and check that. Or if the other two charges, if the DOJ decides to retry the case because the jury was hung on the counts 1 and 3 of that case,
right,
which were the sanctions evasions and money laundering charges. If they decide to retry it, this will now be something that the defense can use in their favor. Say, hey, we have this member of the DOJ saying, this, and this. But again, it's all a matter of how criminal intent is defined. And I think the fact that they left that door open is indicative of something. It's indicative of the fact that they're not willing to just cede all ground here and say, you know what? Oh, cool. You created a thing. Great. And to be honest, if you look into the nuance of US Code 1960 and the various levels of that code, I don't think what Galeotti said is wrong. I just wouldn't get too excited that now thinking the DOJ is just going to turn a blind eye to anyone just because they created non-custodial tech. I don't think it's going to be that simple, nor should it be. I think people yesterday seemed quite emotional. And I'm not trying to be I love Shinobi. I'm not trying to be too Shinobi here by telling people to calm down, curb their enthusiasm. But on a certain level, I think we should just still be conscious and or vigilant about what this looks like, and the fact that I don't think all of these battles are necessarily over. So, and ideally they are. That'll be my cautious optimistic take on it. But he selected his words very carefully as far as I'm concerned. And I recommend to anybody, I left a link in there to the actual talk. It's only 10 minutes long. If this intrigues you, just go watch it for yourself and check out what he said.
Yeah, well said. I think the thing that jumped out to me, or the question that jumped out to me was, how can you have criminal intent when you're writing open source software? How can you, as the dev, have criminal intent?
That's a good point.
The criminal intent is on the part of the criminals who might use it to commit crimes, right?
Or I would say this, and to sort of go back to what the Samurai dev said, if you've created the software and then you're sort of inviting people to use it or making it easier for them to, or just saying hey, you could use this. I wouldn't necessarily say that's criminal intent, but it's not helping matter. I don't know whether that comes down to aiding and abetting. Maybe it's like
criminal marketing, maybe. But it's, to me, it's like saying you can have criminal intent by manufacturing a handgun that somebody uses to commit an armed robbery, right?
Agreed.
The criminal, if you do, you might sell it to someone knowing that they're going to commit the armed robbery, in which case you are kind of an accomplice to it.
Yes.
But the manufacturer of it, how you kind of criminal, if that is a protected activity, the act of it doesn't become criminal by you somehow imbuing it with bad crime thoughts. That doesn't quite make sense to me.
So we'll keep an eye on that. That's all I could say. We'll see where that goes. But he seems like a decent guy. Matthew Galeotti seemed like he was forthright. He did mention that Todd Blanche had sent him to talk about this, just on some more background. And I may have said this on this show before, but I emailed Todd Blanche. I emailed the DOJ every other day for a month, trying to get him on the record to talk about what was happening in the SDNY with the Tornado Cash and Samurai cases, and it was just radio silence. At the same time, I heard it was similar for a lot of people in the industry, so maybe he was sort of biding his time. He had someone like Matthew Galeotti who once, I don't know. My only issue here is why did you wait to send someone from the DOJ to talk about this until after these trials were done? Till after the cases were settled, one plea deal, one criminal verdict. That's the only part here that just sort of rubbed me the wrong way, which is what a little bit of emotionally what compelled me to write this piece last night, because I'm just not fully convinced that what he said is exactly what they mean. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to something else that you had a kind of a funny, not funny, but a valid take on this. So the Bank of International Settlements has come out with a proposal to, I guess, grade different types of digital assets by how, on a scale of not tainted to fully tainted, how tainted coins might be. So Lolita Rage kind of reported on this. In some ways, I think the less said about this kind of thing, the better.
Yes, agreed.
But really, I think you had the right take on it, which is, what about all the billions of dollars that all the major banks in the United States have laundered for drug cartels and oligarchs? And, are those dollars, well, the implied part of what you're saying is, are those dollars tainted? Obviously, the answer is no.
According to the BIS, but if they were to apply if they were to apply the same standards, of course they would be. We just don't have that metric for dollars. It's just a metric we're going to apply to digital assets, but not to dollars.
Yeah. So it goes without saying that this is an attack on the kind of Bitcoin's fungibility.
Yes.
People joke about the Bank of International Settlements. I don't know how seriously to take them, but I think we can safely kind of file this one under the kind of no-coiner academic harebrained scheme that we hopefully don't see too much more about in the future, unless you have more reason to be worried about it than I do.
Yeah, I can say this. I've had I can't say who or where I had this conversation, but I had conversation with someone who's building some very well-funded Bitcoin/Bitcoin adjacent company in this space. One of the main developers for that is in very close contact with the Bank of International Settlements. And I can't say who this is or what it is because it was a private conversation. But I can say that based on both this conversation and others I've had, or as well as others I've had, I think the Bank of International Settlements is worried. They're worried that they're losing their grip. Also, the Bank of International Settlements, it's not a very efficient system, and systems like Bitcoin and or stablecoins are far more efficient. And it's like the amount of rejiggering and rewiring the bank would have to do to get to any sort of level of efficiency. It's almost just like, well, why don't we just adopt stablecoins then or Bitcoin then? Because there's no way we're going to compete with this thing. So my guess is this is like an institution that's becoming irrelevant, just trying to throw any roadblocks they can into the way of progress. That's how I interpreted this, which is why I gave it basically like, a half facetious comment, because I'm just like to quote what's his name from Succession, the father from Succession, you aren't serious people. Like, this isn't a serious thing you're proposing. And I think you were right. Yeah, you were right to say, like, let's not even give this too much oxygen, because I think this is just like a last gasp effort at like something that's not working, to say like, but we could, but this, but that. It's just like, no, stop. Like,
yeah, and it's not even really a Bitcoin thing. Like, the reality is that the passing of the Genius Act is kind of signs the death warrant for this type of thinking anyway.
Agreed.
Because surely this gradation would apply to stablecoins too. So, which is a non-starter given how the powerful interests lined up behind stablecoin adoption and expansion too. So.
No question.
Sorry, BIS. Better luck next time. Let's talk about Sherrod Brown.
Yeah, I actually don't know. I'm looking forward to hearing your take on this. I heard about this, but haven't dived in yet.
Yeah. So I guess the context here is Sherrod Brown, a former longtime Democrat senator from Ohio, who was famously part of the Elizabeth Warren anti-crypto army for a long time. And he lost last year and so was punted out of the Senate. Now, he is set to make a comeback. The Democratic Party is kind of lined up behind him. Looks like he is starting to kind of raise money, and Chuck Schumer of folks are kind of lining up behind him to get him back into a race, I guess, for a different seat next year, in the midterms next year. Why is this interesting, other than the fact that it is an ousted no-coiner still lingering around? Well, what's interesting is, and they've now paywalled the article, that doesn't matter, I can talk to it. He was asked about his stance on crypto in I think a brief interview. And he wasn't very negative. In fact, he said something like crypto is going to continue to be adopted in the United States, and my role or my hope is that we can basically put safeguards around that and make sure that it's done responsibly and this kind of thing.
Right.
Which is a pretty big pivot from one of the chief lieutenants of the Warren anti-crypto army. No huge surprise to me. I mean, if this is a big factor in why you just recently lost an election, you might want to change your strategy, as we were talking about earlier, right?
Yep.
So it's a little bit early to say. I mean, he's not campaigning yet, and it was kind of one soundbite in one interview, but it might be indicative of a pivot, not just from him, but from the Democratic Party more broadly.
No question.
So really that's, it's just a little snippet, but as I said, an indication that maybe tides are turning on the blue side of the aisle.
It would behoove them to allow those tides to turn, or to help those tides turn. It would work. Sherrod Brown, I think, was the perfect example of there's no good reason to have an anti-crypto stance. And I say the perfect example because you could argue that maybe that's not true, given that Warren was the head of that army and she was reelected regardless. It's just that Massachusetts is like such a blue state that you could just say whatever you want and you're going to get reelected as a Democrat. Yeah, just go for it. Whereas Sherrod Brown was in a swing state, and it made a difference in those. Trump won every swing state, so he's a good. If you're in any sort of contentious battleground state, don't have an anti-crypto, anti-Bitcoin stance. It's not going to be good for you in your election prospects. So
Yep. You'll lose.
You'll lose. That's a less academic way to put it. You will lose. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. Not a huge story from the week, but I guess we're into the part of the show now where we kind of see some of the more fringe things going on in the world of Bitcoin policy and politics. This is a funny bill that was introduced by Arkansas Congressman David Schweikert during the week. Look, I don't expect this to pass because it's kind of silly. In a way, but what this bill would do is allow the president to issue what are called letters of marque and reprisal. This is like a kind of an antiquated tool in the toolkit of the commander-in-chief of the United States that would basically allow privateers to on behalf of the government, on behalf of the nation, take actions, arrest, prosecute, and capture pirates, right, and people and enemy combatants. I don't know if in modern history this has ever been done, but this was a bill that would allow it to be done for several offences, including cryptocurrency theft. So you get scammed by someone in a foreign country. This is the idea, or maybe at scale. A lot of people get scammed by someone in. I'm not going to name a country to put the kind of taint of scamminess on. But imagine a country, imagine your mind's eye, one country where a lot of this happens. And then President Trump can basically allow, you've set up a little private vigilante task force.
Let's go.
To arrest and prosecute people doing like phishing attacks on Coinbase accounts or something. And then you can go and arrest them and swoop them up and haul them back here to face justice, or maybe a stay in a CIA black site somewhere off.
That's it. Let's
off
go.
Campus. We'll see. I think this is one of these bills. It's funny. I was talking to actually the guys at Bitcoin Policy Institute this week. We're talking about all these different bills that have been introduced relating to Bitcoin in some way this year, and one of the challenges is it's hard to know sometimes which of them to take seriously. And this doesn't just apply to Bitcoin-related bills. This applies to just how Congress and state legislatures too work, where any one of these lawmakers can introduce a bill. Now, a lot of the times for serious things, Genius Act, Clarity Act, there's a bipartisan process, and there's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's a coalition built of lawmakers who are behind this thing, and it's introduced at least with the hope and the understanding that it's going to progress through. On the other hand, sometimes you might have lesser known lawmakers who are, for whatever reason, looking to make a name for themselves.
Right.
looking to throw it in a highlight reel video for the next like fundraising campaign. And they introduce bills that never have any hope of getting passed, nor are they intended to in any serious way. So I don't know if this is one of those, but we don't perhaps need to spend too much time on it more, other than, imagine if this happened, it would be kind of interesting to see.
Wild. Yeah, some creativity in terms of routes to justice, if you will. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah,
we will. I'll move relatively quickly over this one too. State level, Illinois passed something called the Digital Assets and Consumer Protection Act this week. And ostensibly, I think folks in the crypto industry would say it's an anti-crypto bill. Imposes all kinds of additional obligations for registration and licensing, and some nod to consumer protection issues. Kind of a big bill here in Illinois. I think it's going to make it hard for crypto companies to do business, for Bitcoin companies to do business there, probably. But it does, I guess, exclude peer-to-peer and decentralized activities, which is a good thing. So you're not going to have to register yourself if you like many people in Illinois are doing, holding Bitcoin or other things. But Governor Pritzker, certainly who signed it into law, he was touting it as a kind of clapback, I suppose, against this, in his words, crypto bros writing federal policy with the Trump administration. Does it actually do that? I don't think so. No. This is more kind of a political moment for Governor Pritzker to at least claim that he's had some kind of win in that regard.
Yeah, I think we could probably, for the near future, continue to see this stuff from like the deep blue states, like governors of New York, Chicago, Illinois, California. It just seems to be modus operandi there. I don't even know if they really mean it. I just think that there's enough of a base people who eat this stuff up, and it's just rhetoric.
Along those lines, we saw another bill, not on a different subject, but again, deep blue state. Well. No, Pennsylvania's not a deep. Pennsylvania's a swing state now. Yeah. In my mind, everything just gets more blue as you head towards that part of the country, which is kind of
true. Yeah.
But they have introduced a bill that would ban public officials from holding Bitcoin digital assets. I think a bunch of Democrats co-sponsored this bill. Again, I think it's probably part of this. I think Democrats think there's now some momentum. Well, they can get some momentum behind being seen to attack crypto from different angles, and by extension attack Trump from different angles. So I would kind of put this in that category too. I mean, I'll monitor it, I guess, and stay abreast of it, but I think this one's probably going to die in committee because it's so targeted. And again, it's one of these like public officials and their families, right? So again, it's a Trump flavored bill that's been introduced in Pennsylvania.
It's just such a strange thing to me. I mean, there has to be there just has to be some people involved with this bill who have to understand that at the very least, if they don't think Bitcoin is the capital THE future of money, that it is a type of money more and more people are using. And it's like, it's one thing to maybe like ban stock trading because there's insider trading and this and that, but like to ban people from this, it feels to me similar to like the fact that like many people in the SEC have never used a lot of crypto technology, but they're the ones regulating it. It's like, how do you expect people? I mean, I get where you'd be biased if you held some Bitcoin, price went up a whole bunch. Maybe you'd write more pro Bitcoin legislation. I don't know. But at the same time, like banning people from having that experience or from using the technology, it's like, how do you ever expect evolution to occur? I think what they want here is evolution not to occur. That would be my guess. That's a piece of it. It just seems really intellectually disingenuous, though.
Certainly swimming against the tide here. I think someone replied to me, and it was a good point, that, well, are they going to ban them from holding like Coinbase stock as well? Right. No, obviously. And it was also funny. It's actually also funny now to think, we didn't mention this earlier, but Michelle Bowman at the Fed, she also made comments this week about potentially allowing Fed staff members to hold, I think she said, de minimis amounts of digital assets for reasons that you, I think, just alluded to, which was, well, it's going to help us understand them and we'll be able to kind of regulate them more competently in this kind of thing too. I don't know if I totally agree with that, but you can see that various levels of government are moving in different directions on this issue right now.
No question. Yep.
Yeah. I guess one of the last substantive stories of the week, and I'll kind of lean on you to get a lot of your take here, because it's a meaty one from a part of the world that you're more familiar with than I am.
Yeah.
But big news in Bolivia, as basically there's going to be a runoff election now between two right-wing candidates, which means for the first time, I think in a couple of decades, the what has been the kind of ruling socialist party is not going to form government now. So more or less bringing to end kind of socialist reign over Bolivia that's been roughly there since the beginning of the century. I guess general thoughts on that, and maybe, you know, is this some kind of repudiation of the Evo Morales era, in a general sense, before we jump into maybe Bitcoin and crypto, things as well related.
I think it is, but I think the other thing you need to look at is that even during that Evo Morales era, he lifted the ban on Bitcoin and digital currencies, or the government lifted the ban a year ago. You know, this is while he was still in power. And I think that came from nothing more than like necessity, if I'm not mistaken. Bloomberg actually did a really good piece on this. I don't have the link handy. It just sort of came up as I was talking about it. But Bolivia was one of maybe 8 or 9 countries on the planet that had like a full, like, outright ban on Bitcoin, like straight up, like if you have this thing, you're going to jail sort of stuff. And they changed that because inflation in Bolivia has been bananas, as it often is in socialist countries. For those who don't know, I lived in Venezuela under Chavez. I've seen this stuff on the ground. It's not pleasant. I don't know. I don't remember. I do remember hearing about that ban getting lifted, but I don't know all of the details. I would imagine that part of the reason socialism was rejected, I would imagine, is probably similar to why, I don't know, Milei was elected in Argentina. It's like you have these policies, people have been trying them for decades, nothing is really getting better. Then you see something, you see a free market asset, you see Bitcoin come into it. In this Bloomberg piece, I was kind of blown away. They were talking about barbers accepting it and people selling, I think it was something on the side of the road accepting it, whatever it was. And it just becoming just like a common thing. Like, yeah, of course we would use that. Like, why would we want to use our sort of hyperinflating currency, or at least seriously inflating currency? So I think that I think that the broader rebuke here wasn't just like this political at the polls rebuke to socialism. It's a broader, like, hey, a year ago when we started being allowed to use these assets, we realized that our quality of life started getting better. Maybe this election is an extension of that. Maybe like we started realizing there are some benefits to the free market, the actual free market, something like Bitcoin, where, you know, value can be transferred and value is, you know, people's wealth isn't being diluted at some sort of exponential rate. So I think it was huge. The one thing I didn't know, and I learned this from looking into this, is that the Central Bank of Bolivia has signed a memorandum of understanding with El Salvador's National Committee for Digital Assets to basically have some sort of sharing to gain more expertise about Bitcoin and digital assets. I was like, I read that and I was like, wow, like I haven't been paying close enough attention to this, obviously. But to me, that's almost a bigger story than the election. You know, a socialist leader being rebuked. And like, I was saying to you earlier, I interviewed Jeff Booth this morning for an interview that'll be out early next week. And we talked about this. I don't fault people for thinking that socialism is a solution. Because the kind of capitalism that we live in, crony capitalism, where most of the gains are siphoned off to the top, maybe 1% to 5%, isn't working for people. And if they think that's what an actual free market is, then obviously they're going to like, well, I want the opposite then. It's what we're seeing in New York right now. It's people voting for Zoran Mamdani. And I get that, but then it's odd when you see actually everyday people in Bolivia now using Bitcoin as just money and being like, yep, my life is better as a result. Psychology shifts. Now you have people voting more on the right and all this kind of stuff, because the right, at least philosophically, is more aligned with something like Bitcoin. There are still plenty of people on the right who don't really like Bitcoin and are more sort of into that crony capitalism type of stuff. But I think that the story here really is like, under Morales, you had this ban lifted. Now people are starting to think and vote differently. That's exciting. That's real world. That's what Bitcoin was built for. It was built to be the lifeboat. It was built to be that money that people use when they're in pain because the system is not working in their favor. So Bolivia is a really cool example of that. I'm really excited that obviously that ban was lifted. And based on some reporting, you have crypto transactions since that ban was lifted up over 500% in Bolivia over the course of about a year or so. I hope El Salvador provides them with some cool information about Bitcoin. That would be fantastic. And I hope that we see more proliferation of this technology in Bolivia, especially in the wake of ideally a government that's going to be more friendly to this technology.
Yep. Yeah. And it's, as I said, it's not a part of the world that I'm intimately familiar with. But I think what's striking to me is that, and I'm no sympathizer for Evo Morales and that style of government, that socialism more generally, but it's clear that to me that like it doesn't really, you can raise the literacy rates and you can do these types of things and you can make life better for the coal miners or whatever, and you can have these wins, but at the end of the day, once your currency gets massively debased and starts hyperinflating, none of that stuff matters.
Doesn't matter. Right?
And to me, this is like related to one of the lessons generally that you take from these kind of hyper left wing regimes that fail so often is, inflation is the road to hell, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
Sometimes not so good. I'm not saying they always do have good intentions. Often they don't. Often it's about kind of naked, favoring of interest groups and kind of redistribution and all this other stuff. But even if the intentions are good, like this is where it can lead. And once you get there, then it does become monocausal. That's what people care about. Okay, am I getting poorer every day? If the answer to that is yes, then we're going to want change. Right?
Yep. Yeah, 100%. People, I think I'm really sort of on this tip right now. I think people are smarter than you give them credit for. They're intuitive. If they start to see that something is helping them, something like Bitcoin, they're going to use it, and they're not going to want anyone to be in the way of that. And I think people are more resilient. I think people are really creative. So I think about it. One thing I'll say here, I remember when I was trying to get out of my old job as a college lecturer, I wanted to move on, but my biggest fear, it was one, I just didn't want to be miserable at what I was doing anymore. That was my biggest concern. And I wanted to move into the Bitcoin space, but didn't have a job yet. But my biggest fear was sort of I don't want to have to take this jump, all this Bitcoin I've worked hard to save and then spend it all, or especially if there's this massive drawdown, then I spend it, blah, blah, blah. And it was an impetus for me to work harder to find a job. I was okay, I found this thing that's really genuinely helping me right now. And I think after experiencing that, you realize what happens when the rest of the world feels that, when all of these people in Bolivia start to feel oh, okay, I can just be a barber and actually have a decent living now. And it's going to change psychology in a way where people are going to naturally, I think, become more self-reliant because they feel that something is at stake. They don't want to lose that purchasing power and that freedom that Bitcoin gives them. So they're going to work harder to maintain it, which means they're going to take more responsibility in their lives. So beyond whatever political ramifications Bitcoin has in Bolivia, I think that's that's a very difficult trend to quantify, but you could probably quantify it in terms of entrepreneurial activity and people wanting to have more control over their financial situation and their economic and financial situation in life, which to me, it's fantastic. Ideally, we move into an era of human flourishing as a result of that. And to know, in my mind, having lived and worked in Latin America and different parts of Africa and places of the world that have been disenfranchised in so many ways from the traditional systems, to know that everyone across the globe can now feel that, as long as you have an internet connection or some way to get some Bitcoin. To me, it's one of the largest unrecognized forces on the planet. I say unrecognized, it's recognized amongst Bitcoiners, but it's surely not recognized amongst, I would imagine, not amongst the political elite and other groups. So yeah, we're moving in this super cool direction, I think, where changes are now just sort of naturally going to happen because they have to, because people are in pain, and because people are being proactive, taking responsibility for themselves and saying, hey, this works better for me. I'm going to do what I can to protect it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to believe in the future, right?
Yes.
And, you know, there's like the future in a grand abstract sense, but that kind of, there's this kind of like fractal growth effect where like the future can just be 24 hours away. It can just be like tomorrow. And before I can believe that the big picture future can be better, I have to at least believe that maybe tomorrow can be better. And so on and so forth, right? And you kind of build up from that.
Yep.
If tomorrow you're going to be 10% poorer than you were today, like I don't really care what else is going in your life, like you're going to feel like the future is worse.
Totally.
And really that's what Bitcoin's number going up represents on a long enough time horizon. Like in a short, in a short-term sense, it looks like speculation. But in a longer term sense, it's, as you said, well, people can believe that I'm sure Jeff Booth was talking to you about this morning. People can keep the fruits of their own labor, right?
That's it.
And as soon as they can do that, they can start planning. And planning with optimism. And then, these are the little baby steps on which, societal progress must be based. So, happy for the folks in Bolivia who now have access to Bitcoin. And it's one more example of maybe trending in the right direction for folks who previously didn't have an option.
Absolutely. One last thing I'd like to add to this. I think it's really important because I think it also, this idea of like socialism or sort of like a paternalistic system fixing something for you. I also spent some time last year, I was there for a day, but in the largest, I don't like the word, but the largest slum in Africa, the largest informal settlement in Africa is a place called Kibera, and it's within the city limits of, Kenya. Why am I spacing out? Nairobi. And I had someone so I wrote a piece on this for Forbes. If you Google my name and Kibera or whatever, Nairobi, you'll see the piece come up. It ended up going pretty viral. I got a message from the guy who runs the Bitcoin circular economy within this informal settlement, which based on the people I interviewed, I spoke with mothers who were talking about planning for their children's future now because they run this economy on Bitcoin. And some of it is just pure necessity, meaning you have refugees within this community who can't even get a digital ID, which means they can't even use the traditional digital system. You need an ID to be able to use that system. Yeah, Bitcoin economy forms in Africa's largest informal settlement. Apparently, this story went viral. I didn't know it, but now media, news networks from all over the world come in. The guy just messaged me after he was on air in Germany. He was on television in Germany because what this informal settlement was previously most known for was the amount of NGOs that operate within it. And those NGOs were like parasitic in that they're like, no. We have all these poor people. We need to keep being here. But they're just sort of taking all these funds, maintaining the bureaucracy of the NGOs without actually making the situation better for people on the ground. And now people on the ground who are saving in Bitcoin, running their businesses on Bitcoin, all of this stuff are like, wait, the value of money can go up. Like it's just like, wait, things can get better in this kind of regard. And it's
things can get better, right?
That's
that simple.
And it's to your point. And I think having seen this on the ground in one of the poorest parts of Africa, if psychology can shift there, you have to imagine that we're really early in a global psychology shifting. And not to get too whatever philosophical about it. This is a Bitcoin, laws and policy and everything else show. But I think this does speak to the idea of it's not a good thing to bar politicians from holding this stuff. Because I said this to Jeff this morning as well. I interviewed Eric Trump last year. And when I spoke with him, he started talking, I would imagine it was a little bit more than philosophically because he owns some Bitcoin, but about Bitcoin as property and Bitcoin as property for people who can't afford property and what that means for people to have stake in something and this and that. And I'm like, look, even if you're just reiterating talking points someone told you, keep it up. If you're the president's son and this is how you're talking, keep going. I'm into it. And I think that there's once more of that is experienced, the better it is. My question to Jeff was do you think it's a good thing that Trump and his family own Bitcoin so that they're experiencing the benefits of it, that they're maybe more friendly to it from a regulatory perspective. Not that just the president make the rules, but like it would help. So I think it's funny to watch like certain politicians ban themselves from it. Like to quote Odell, like you don't ban Bitcoin, you can only ban yourself from it. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. Because it needs to be something that's viscerally felt. You need to have that experience with it. For me, I got into this stuff because of partially because of student loan debt. When someone said like, yeah, over time, this is going to be worth more. It was like, oh, okay, cool. Like maybe I won't have to live my entire life in student loan debt. That'd be fantastic. Like, and so it's like, I get it on a certain level. I don't know what it's like to grow up in a slum in Africa. I'm not going to say I get it for those people, but on a certain level, I get this idea of like, I wanted my future to be better too. Like that was part of the reason I got into this. So yeah, to tie it back to what we normally touch on, dear politicians, don't ban yourselves from Bitcoin. Try to learn what it is. I have a feeling you're going to see the benefits of it. And shout out to Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna not only talks about Bitcoin in the American context and what that can do for financial inclusion, but as a global asset that people around the world can use to preserve the value of their labor, as you put it. It's a really, really important thing that I think needs to be felt viscerally, not ETFs, not exposure to Coinbase stock, but actual holding some Bitcoin and seeing what that actually does for your psychology.
Yes. Well, it's not important to me that politicians get rich, but it actually is important to me that politicians likewise believe that the future can be better too.
Yes,
right?
Agreed.
That actually does matter. So for that reason alone, maybe we should hope that some of them get orange pilled one way or another. Maybe final thing to touch on, somewhat relatedly, quick shout out to you for a story you're working on. Do you want to talk about what is going on with Africa's Bitcoin Policy Institute?
Yeah, Africa, I think they just call it the ABI, the Africa Bitcoin Institute. So that's Anais Kanimba. Her father was the gentleman that he was the protagonist, the real life protagonist in the film Hotel Rwanda. Anais was, I think, 2 years old while the genocide was taking place in Rwanda in 1994. Paul Rusesabagina, who ran the actual Hotel Rwanda, or whatever the hotel itself was called, adopted Anais and her sister. Both of Anais's parents were unfortunately killed in the genocide. But in the process of, so in 2020, the Rwandan government actually abducted her father, who had to flee the country for a number of political reasons after the genocide and after he had sort of saved the lives of people by housing them in his hotel while the genocide was happening. She got involved in advocating for the release of her father from the Rwandan government. And during that process, she talked about Alex Gladstein inviting her to the Oslo Freedom Forum. And she looked over and saw Bitcoin people doing stuff. And she's like, essentially WTF are these crypto bros doing here at the Oslo Freedom Forum? And I think it was actually the Bitcoin / freedom tech movement. They helped her with maintaining their privacy. Anais, her sister and her cousin actually had, what's it called? I'm forgetting the name of it. It's the Israeli spy malware that can be put on your phone. There's a name for it, and I'm totally spacing.
Stuxnet?
No, it's there. It's I'm spacing on the name. It's neither here nor there. Very, very well known sort of spy software, but it was put on her phone, and the privacy tech people helped her to sort of better protect against that kind of stuff happening. And in the process of learning how to maintain better digital privacy, learned about Bitcoin. And I think some of that Bitcoin actually was used to help in the fundraising efforts to get her dad freed, because there were certain donors that wanted to donate to those fundraising efforts, the legal efforts, that couldn't do so having their name tied to it through a bank transfer. I don't know whether maybe they lived in Rwanda or had some associate, whatever it was. So the anonymity that donating with Bitcoin offered them was enough for them to make the donation. And this is how she learned about the effects of Bitcoin, and has since joined Farida Nabarema, a Togolese activist who does amazing work with Bitcoin, as well as Femi Longe from HRF, their global Bitcoin lead, and one other person I'm spacing out on. Eric Hersman from Gridless, legendary human being. If you don't know Gridless, definitely Google it. They do really cool work using renewable power to mine Bitcoin and to help electrify rural Africa. But anyway, she was sort of, within the last 2 or 3 years, fully orange pilled, totally sees what Bitcoin is, why it's worth something. And she's one of the people that the Africa Bitcoin Institute has sort of brought in, I guess you would say, as a co-founder, to start helping Africans themselves document why Bitcoin is valuable, and to help speak with African policymakers about this. And I think this is really important There are not many people documenting it. I used to primarily focus on Bitcoin adoption in Africa for my efforts when I was writing more for Forbes. But that's fine for me as like a white New Yorker helping to spread that story. But I really shouldn't be the one telling it. Like, well, I can help to tell it, but there should be more people on the ground talking about their lived realities, why Bitcoin is important, to hopefully create better regulation around it. And a quick one thing, Anais said that I thought was really kind of powerful. Like many people, we didn't go too far into her current feelings about the current administration or not, but she did say that it's incredibly important for the administration the U.S. administration to not take an antagonistic stance toward Bitcoin, because that will ultimately have an effect on the way leaders in Africa think about it, just given the United States as sort of a financial superpower. And then those leaders in Africa could have an impact on the way people are using it in the P2P fashion, whether or not that's allowed. So really, really fascinating conversation. If you Google her name, Anais Kanimba, and myself, or go to our Bitcoin Magazine YouTube channel, you might actually be watching there. I highly recommend listening to that interview. It's about 40 minutes long, really gives an amazing perspective on someone who came to the world through activism, through having been a refugee, for having watched her father kidnapped by an autocratic regime, and through HRF to learn later sort of what Bitcoin is and why it's valuable, and now becoming one of the bigger advocates in Africa for it. It's a really, really cool trajectory, really cool arc.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Frank, that brings us to the end of the agenda for this edition of Capital Gains.
Yep.
Thanks again for joining me on this wild ride. Thanks again to everybody who's tuning in on YouTube, Rumble, X, wherever you may be. Again, I suppose a quick call to action or an ask is please reach out to us. If you've got any thoughts, feedback on the show, any questions, anything you want us to touch on next week, any questions you would like us to answer, we can give that a shot as well. Please, wherever you're watching, probably on one of the Bitcoin Magazine channels, make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure that you tune in. I will say tentatively next Friday as we do this again, although Frank, I know you're going to be in Asia, so maybe we'll find some way of doing something. TBC.
There'll be some messaging. We'll send it out about how we're going to do this. On that note, I'm going to give a quick shill. I'll be hosting the live desk from Bitcoin Asia. If you suffer from insomnia and you're listening to this in the United States, feel free to join us. Obviously, we'll be broadcasting sort of inverse hours, I think, starting at, you can watch at night, I guess. We're going to be starting at about 8:30 a.m. local time, which I believe is maybe 8:30 or 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So I'll be broadcasting with Pete Rizzo from the event. Event seems like it's going to be super cool. Really cool balance of like financial Bitcoin stuff, Metaplanet, but also Nostr stuff as it pertains to maybe China and things like that. Ideally, Frank doesn't become part of those conversations and disappear, but we'll not joke about that on air anymore. But anyway, I'll be over there doing that. That's Thursday and Friday of next week. Again, inverse hours, and we're ahead. So if you're I apologize. So exactly. So that would be, we'll be starting. So Wednesday and Thursday evening, it'll be starting Eastern time, US. So keep an eye out for that. And I will do my best to figure out a time for us to touch base and to recap the week.
Sounds good. Well, once again, I'm Julian Fahrer. That is Frank Corva. This has been Capital Gains. We will see you again next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Take it easy, everybody.
One second, I just got to